So hi everyone, I'm Amy Mobby, Education Manager at Jenkins Arboretum and Gardens. We're so glad that you could join us for tonight's lecture, How to Manage Stormwater and Streamside Areas on Your Property. Thank you to all of our members joining us today for your continued support. A big welcome to all of our non-members and newcomers out there. And with you all in mind, let me take a moment to share a bit about our garden. Jenkins Arboretum and Gardens celebrates the wonder of plants and place as a destination for education, conservation, and community connection. We are a 48-acre botanical garden located in the Philadelphia suburbs that specializes in plants native to the region and are home to a world-class collection of azaleas and rhododendrons. Jenkins is open to visitors every day of the year and is always free of an admission fee, thanks to generous community support. If you're not already a member, we encourage you to join our Jenkins family. Tonight's lecture is a great example of community support and community partnership. Our co-sponsors include Aqua, an essentials utility company, Tredyffrin Public Library, Tredyffrin Township Environmental Advisory Council, and Open Land Conservancy. Let me share a bit about our sponsors. This lecture is supported by a grant provided by Aqua, an essential utilities company, to Tredyffrin Public Libraries to work with partners to provide a stream health series of programs. The series will include a story time and walk to the pond for young children and caregivers, a macroinvertebrate study with teens, and 2 programs, including tonight's lecture, about streamside property management for adults. Tredyffrin Public Library in Stratford Park offers engaging programs and materials for all ages and is a welcoming space for community members to gather and be inspired. Tredyffrin Public Library is recognized as a Gold Star Library by the Pennsylvania Library Association for its commitment to offering programs in all areas of literacy. In 2024, Tredyffrin Public Library opened a brand new makerspace and expanded its library of things. Tredyffrin Township Environmental Advisory Council is a volunteer township board whose projects promote environmental quality and sustainability within the township. The projects include tree plantings and the restoration of natural landscapes in Tredyffrin's parks, demonstration projects such as rain gardens, volunteer events such as trash cleanups, and public education. The Open Land Conservancy is a nonprofit land trust dedicated to preserving open space in the Valley Creek watershed. They are an all-volunteer organization and are always happy to welcome new members and volunteers. Now for a few housekeeping items. We are using the Zoom webinar format. We can't see or hear you at home, so feel free to knit, eat your snacks, let your dogs bark. We won't know. If you move your cursor and activate your Zoom toolbar, you'll find 2 items that we'll use today, chat and Q&A. You can use chat for general comments, although I may have to change the permissions real quick before you do so. And you can put your questions in the speakers in the Q&A, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. Now to introduce our presenters for tonight's lecture. Mark Gallagher is Vice President and founding principal of Princeton Hydro, a firm based in Trenton, New Jersey, focusing on providing experience, expertise, and excellence in water resources, ecology, and geotechnical engineering. Mark oversees all wetland and terrestrial ecology projects for the firm. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Moravian College and a Master of Science in Plant Ecology from Rutgers University. Clay Emerson is Princeton Hydro's Senior Technical Director for Engineering. Clay has specific expertise in the field of stormwater infiltration and has conducted extensive research on the performance of stormwater systems. Clay holds a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Rowan University, a Master of Engineering from Drexel University, and a PhD in water resource engineering from Villanova University. So at this point, I will turn things over to Mark and Clay to get us started. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us. And I will get this screen shared. All right. There we go. Is that working?
Yep, looks
It
great.
is.
Excellent. So I'll hand it over to you, Mark, to get us started.
All right. Let's go to the first slide. Thanks. We're going to go through a few key points today. First being to really understand the nature of our degraded streams, which we don't have many good examples of healthy streams in the region, and we'll talk about why. We're going to identify some ways in which you can help better the quality of our streams just through how you manage stormwater on your own properties. And then we're going to provide some examples of larger projects that are more on a watershed scale that show how we can correct some of the problems with our streams. As I said, healthy streams are not common in much of our region. Now, Valley Creek here is kind of a gem for you, but a lot of other areas aren't so lucky and their streams have a lot of issues. This is an example of a stream up near the Delaware Water Gap. It's one of the healthier streams around. Cool water, a lot of tree cover, not a lot of development within the watershed. And some of the characteristics of healthier, more natural streams is they're dynamic systems, but they're in a dynamic equilibrium, which means after every storm event, there could be some erosion, but normally it has a chance to heal before the next storm event. So the banks tend to be slowly eroding. They do meander though, and over time, streams will move. And a lot of states have created meander belts to allow them to migrate over time within those areas and not to put housing or roads or something that would constrict that natural meandering. Normally, a healthy stream has a good connection to its floodplain. And during smaller storm events, like 1.5 to 2 year storm events, the water will go out of bank into a floodplain. And they said there's just a natural flexibility that allows these streams to move in an unconstrained manner. However, we've done a lot of things to streams in the name of getting water to move as fast as possible through a community or a town or a development or a farm. And this is one of New Jersey's attempt to try to replicate the Los Angeles River. And it's a concrete line channel. Clay, you had said that during a flood event, actually someone in an apartment drowned.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so this was an area of, again, not exactly the shining example of a river that New Jersey has, but yeah, this is the Elizabeth River, highly urbanized watershed, and uh, part of the band of very intense rainfall during Hurricane Ida, and there were people who perished in their homes along the banks of the Elizabeth River, unfortunately.
Closer to home, Philadelphia has a number of these enclosed streams, which many, like 100+ years ago, they just built these somewhat engineering marvels to enclose streams that run through Philadelphia. And again, one of the major points here is it facilitated the movement of water from upstream to downstream as efficiently as possible. We've dammed many of our rivers. which impact fish passage, impacts water quality, impacts sediment getting to our estuaries. Legacy sediment is a problem in many parts of Pennsylvania, just from historic farming and forestry. That sediment has accumulated in floodplains, and the disconnection between the stream and the floodplain is many times due to the accumulation of legacy sediment. In urban streams, of course, with any urban stream, the best thing to do in the past was to fill the areas in, the wetlands or floodplain adjacent to. And this was a common practice to create more desirable land by eliminating wetlands or filling in the floodplains to create developable land adjacent to streams. And in many cases, just filling in the stream like you saw with the pipe stream in Philadelphia. And this is one of my all-time favorite advertisements from DuPont in how to use dynamite to improve streams. And on the left, it just states crooked streams are a menace to life and crops in the areas bordering their banks. And then on the other side, there are some lines, and it is DuPont dynamite has straightened many thousands of miles of crooked streams. So again, the whole purpose of the use of dynamite in this context was to facilitate the flow of streams through an area, to straighten them. Those natural bends in streams are important because they help slow the flow. So we have done many things to our streams in the name of just moving water from one point to another. And on top of it, just the development pressure has also led to degradation of our streams on a watershed basis. And one of the most common issues that occurs with regard to development is an increase in the volume of water that reaches the streams. And that water, that excess water, has eroded streams, deepened channels or widened channels, and in many cases have disconnected those streams from their floodplains. And studies done in the 80s found that a lot of development and ecological degradation begins when there's less than 10% impervious coverage within a watershed. And that's really more about the biota in the stream. And as that number increases, it just further degrades channels primarily related to the volume of water. I'm just going to go through a lot of the little things that are all like death by a thousand cuts. Even now, Pennsylvania does not regulate streams that drain less than 100 acres if there's no adjacent wetlands. And this is a headwater stream in Bucks County that had some development issues, and DEP just said it only drained 75 acres. We don't really care. So those are the kind of issues, those headwater areas really provide the foundation for the streams below them. And that really is where all our streams form. And losing those headwater areas creates a domino effect that everything after that is worsened by modifying those headwater areas. And this is going to go through some examples of our current view of many streams. This is an area in North Jersey that you can see it's probably downcut 4 or 5 feet, eroded banks, exposed soil. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is one just outside of Washington, D.C. And one of the things that is really a clear telltale sign is anytime you see roots growing in the air, that represents a loss of soil. Roots don't grow in the air. So for those roots in that tree with the pink flag on it, that 3, 4 feet of root that's extending out over the stream channel, the bank used to be at the tip of that root, and all that soil is gone. And in this case, in the Chesapeake Bay, and just that amount of soil alone, that's when we start to talk about nutrient problems in our receiving bodies of water, like lakes or ponds or bays in this case.
And in this example, you can see that that stream is down cut all the way to, it looks like a bedrock outcrop there in the
It
center.
is. Just another example of down cutting. And again, this is related to that issue of excess stormwater volume. And this is a common practice or common scene. We design these culverts and we put riprap scour protection at the down gradient side of the pipe. But after a number of years, this is not uncommon to see that those areas have eroded and that riprap or stone protection is gone. And in this case, it was probably a 4-foot drop from the end of that pipe to the stream channel. And this is stream. We're going to show some photographs later because it was restored. But the photograph on the left, if you notice, you can see these handful of conifers, little Christmas trees. 4 years, 2009, the stream moved 23 feet. All those Christmas trees were gone. So this is what I was saying, that excess volume has made a lot of our stream channels very unstable. And the meandering is not slow anymore. It could be pretty rapid as they try to find a way to stabilize themselves. So it's either by dissipating that energy by deepening the channel or widening the channel, in some cases both. And this is just an example of conversion of land from, this was probably farm field, but these are our new headwaters. All these sites are drained or graded and shaped to get water off individual lots as quickly as possible, to get them to a stormwater basin. And in this case, if you look on the left, you see a little riprap and a concrete channel. That water enters there and then quickly crosses that stormwater basin and leaves, goes to a stream. But it's how we grade sites, and any property that the water leaves the lot, if there's a storm drain in the street right there, that is really the new beginning of our network of tributaries. They're man-made tributaries, but they facilitate the flow of water to our streams. And it's that excess volume again that starts to create the problems associated with our streams. So brings us to the question of what we can do. And I'm going to hand this off to Clay, and he's going to talk to you about some ways you can help reduce the volume of runoff that gets to the streams, and that every property owner can, just even doing little things will help reduce that volume. And then
Yeah,
later oh, sorry, go ahead, Clay.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say later we'll talk about some restoration methods to reconnect streams to their floodplains.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Mark, for that intro, and we apologize for the rapid doom and gloom slides there about the impacts of the stream, but that's our starting point. Unfortunately, that's where we find ourselves. So the optimistic question is, so what can we do about this? And as Mark alluded to, there's both um, attacking the problem at its source, which is this volume of runoff, and then also some things we can do um, at the stream or floodplain level that will accomplish, work towards the same goal. And I don't think that there is a solid line that differentiates these two things. And I think in practice, that's what it has come to be. And in some of these examples, one may be definitely more of a stormwater project, and one may be a little bit more of a floodplain project or a riparian buffer project. But at least as a firm, we like to blur the line between those two things. And we think that functional infrastructure doesn't need to look like necessarily a basin or a concrete box or something like that. Um, and you'll see a theme as we get into those later projects of really trying to use um, the form and function of natural systems to achieve these goals. Um, so. I like to talk about the evolution of stormwater because it ties in with what Mark said in terms of the volume of runoff. And really, in just our lifetimes, probably I can speak for most of us on this, we've seen this transition or evolution of stormwater management. So, at least in Pennsylvania and the Mid-Atlantic for sure. So we went from pipe runoff directly to stream, get it there as quickly as possible. And the photo here on the right is Valley Forge National Historic Park. I took this photo a long time ago, and it kind of summarizes everything in that photo. Number one, you have the pipe directly to the stream. It's discharging runoff. You have the eroded stream bank. Obviously no one designed that pipe literally sticking out of the riverbank. There was a section on the end that has fallen off and is somewhere in the Schuylkill River right now. And then you also see the suspended sediment, the brown water in Valley Creek, our exceptional value resource stream, and the artifacts that it's likely washing into the Schuylkill River in this photo. So it kind of encompasses everything. It's got the source of the problem and the effect. And then a friend of mine took this in Manayunk, a little downstream from here. We now have a new roadkill that's a common carp that didn't make it across the road. So what do we do about it? This problem was recognized in PA, and I won't belabor this too much. This probably isn't what you necessarily want to hear about, but if you drive around your community, you'll see a lot of, and this is one of them in Valley Creek watershed, you'll see a lot of large stormwater basins, and those were built to meet regulations that don't exist today. We have much more comprehensive regulations, but these started popping up in your community in the early 80s, maybe even a few in the late 70s. But we have a new focus on water quality, and most importantly, now we do have rules and regulations, especially in Tredyffrin Township, that require that you address the volume of runoff. And this is an example project in Chester County that, again, is a basin, but to the property owner and adjacent neighbors, they can't differentiate this stormwater basin from a natural meadow, which is what they wanted here. But it still does what it was required to do, and it does it better than a standard basin would. So where we are today, these are all photos. Thank you, Ann, for one of these in particular. From Tredyffrin Township. So you have the township has a very forward-looking stormwater ordinance, and so developers and redevelopers in Tredyffrin Township need to put a lot of thought into stormwater, often put a lot of expense into stormwater, and do it right. So these are all, again, photos in in Tredyffrin Township specifically, and there's your hardworking township engineer looking at a green roof. There's another green roof in the bottom center photo, a typical stormwater bioretention basin on the right. And then there are a lot of underground systems within the township and beyond that also are often designed to get that water back into the ground. Because a theme that you've seen here is these streams adjust and they adjust to the hydrology. And as the hydrology has changed, so have the streams. And so one of the things that Mark pointed out in that earlier slide with the basin in the foreground and the couple large homes, some distance apart, is that we've all kind of become riparian property owners. And I don't mean that when you hear the term riparian property owners, you think of someone who lives along the Valley Creek or along some waterway. And that's certainly what the word riparian means. But if you look at this little screenshot of a portion of the township, the network of roads, whether it's the more dense townhome development or the more typical residential development throughout Chester County, there is always a series of inlets, curb gutter lines to inlets to pipes, perhaps to basins if depending on the age of the community. And there's often a piped discharge to the stream because that's generally how things are designed. And so the suburban landscape that we live in and enjoy shows evidence of this evolution of stormwater that I went through in the previous three slides. So here you can see a forested riparian buffer of sorts, and you can tell that there's a stream that's meandering through here. But there's a lot of outfalls along the way. So, this person over here doesn't consider themselves a riparian property owner, but the reality is that their downspout that goes to their driveway, that goes to the inlet, that goes directly to the stream in many cases, that's as from a water quality standpoint and a stormwater standpoint, that's just bears the same responsibility in terms of property ownership and what someone might want to do, probably many of you in the audience here, to better the situation for the stream or the watershed as someone who lives right on the stream. Because it's probably just a quick 2-minute trip away. So that dense drainage network, that series of whether it be swales, curb lines, inlets, pipes, has shifted the physical response of watershed. And by physical response, I mean when it rains and the stream rises or floods, that has been changed, not just because the impervious cover, of course, that's been built that we talked about earlier, but also because of that drainage network that's designed to efficiently get it from point A to the stream, point B. So what can the average homeowner do? Well, I would argue that the average homeowner can do everything that, frankly, the developers do or are required to do to comply with stormwater regulations. You can do them too, and they can be very simple. They can be very low cost, or they can be they can be fairly elaborate. And I'm just going to take you through a couple simple examples of homeowner scale approaches that will help address that volume of stormwater runoff. So downspout disconnection. I think in the previous image, I pointed out a home and said, I don't know if you can see the pointer here, but if this person's downspout currently goes into their driveway, which goes straight to the street, it never has the opportunity to infiltrate. So simply redirecting a downspout can break that connection. And in the smaller typical storms, maybe that runoff will never actually make it to the stream. It will be allowed to infiltrate. Everyone's heard of rain gardens. I tried to pick some examples here that didn't include those. I'm a big fan of rain gardens, of course, but um, I tried to pick some maybe different examples that you haven't seen. Yes, you can build a rain garden. You can probably do it yourself. There's a lot of good guidance out there on generally how to do it, plant selection, and you've probably, if you're on this presentation, probably seen one of those before. So, but there's other things, some more structural things or things that can be done with other improvements, permeable pavers, dry wells, vegetated buffers. And I should point out, I mentioned the Tredyffrin Township ordinance before. Um, Even smaller projects that on-lot developments are, depending on how much impervious cover is proposed, are also required to do stormwater management. So sometimes in a lot of communities, including Tredyffrin, even small improvements on the lot level will actually require some of these things. So here is a really nice, quick, self-contained example of a more developed, and in your community in this part of Chester County, you have areas that are more similar to some of the images Mark showed, typical uh, lower density suburban landscapes, but you also have some kind of, semi-urban areas. You think of Paoli section and other areas. So you can do things there too. So importantly, this homeowner has construction oversight, making sure things are done right. As this person here is connecting their downspout to a new drainage pipe and taking that runoff away from the foundation and basement, and putting in, any number of different manufactured storage units that just makes a place for the water to go temporarily. So rainfall from the rooftop that used to go to the patio and probably create an issue there, especially in the winter, days like this, now goes underground and goes to this uh, empty before the storm system that allows it to soak into the ground in between storms. Um, And in this case, this person in particular is kind of adventurous and did this himself, but not a terribly heavy lift. So a simple series of PVC pipes, again, collecting that water from the downspouts, bringing it to this subsurface system, some fabric, some clean stone, and you can get an idea of the scale there. Um, yes, these things can be sized. They do need to have an overflow. There's some other design consideration, but it's not, um, anything is better than nothing. If you're doing installing one of these because you have to, then the sizing is obviously much more important and would be carefully dictated and reviewed. Um, but it's a simple process. It's not rocket science. It's some basic pipe. It's not much more than a trip to your local hardware store. Um, Permeable pavers. So in this instance, a kind of unsightly old standard concrete patio is being replaced with permeable pavers. And if you haven't seen these, um, this is kind of a close-up of them on the palette, and you can see that they're really just regular pavers. They're made of the same material that standard pavers are. The only difference is that they have these um, nubs here, these little bump outs that line up with one another and maintain, in this case, about a half an inch gap, maybe a little less than that, between pavers. So they don't quite butt up against one another. Um, and then that space is filled typically with some kind of clean, very small diameter, uniform diameter stone that, you know, aesthetically looks fine, pleasing, but allows water to soak through readily. And they're usually accompanied with a stone subbase, which again, just like that black garbage can looking thing, that dry well in the previous example, just gives that runoff a place to go during the intense portion of the storm. And in the hours and usually 3 days to week following the storm, that runoff can infiltrate into the ground and not make it to the stream. So in this image, there's a river just out of the view here um, on the left. And so that impervious surface is taken out and replaced with a permeable surface along with this storage zone. And that's the finished product. And one other thing I want to show you in this that will go into the next slide is you see the downspout here that used to discharge the rooftop onto that standard pavement and right towards the river that is just in the narrow, albeit narrow, forested buffer here, is now taken somewhere else. And instead of them discharging to the patio, what this homeowner did was turn the corner, if you will, and brought that water further away from the river and solved another problem with it. So they wanted a vegetated screen to separate aesthetically, visually, their property from the neighbor's property, but vegetation needs water. Let's solve two problems with one solution here, and that is to bring that runoff that used to run onto the patio and into the river and bring it over to this area where they want to establish a vegetated buffer. So it's a multifunctional system, gets the runoff away from the river, gives the runoff an opportunity to, number one, be captured and used by the plants, and excess water be infiltrated into the ground. So instead of a deep dry well, that was 3 or 4 feet deep in that picture, here we're keeping that runoff, that water source shallow, just underground. This is before it was backfilled, so that the root zone of the trees that will be that are planted here have full access to it. And if they can't, if the pipe can't keep up, it can overflow and literally just discharge to the surface here, away from the river, away from the stream, and benefit the plants here. And so after a year, you can see that has started to totally fill in. So vegetation didn't need to be watered and is maintained going forward without any effort on behalf of the property owner here. So green roofs. I had some pictures of these before, and we don't typically talk about these on a individual lot or homeowner level. These are pictures in an aerial view from the township. So it's a multi-use building where the developer installed green roofs. This is right after construction. So here they use the rollout system instead of the plugs, where you can kind of set the green roof, build the green roof from the bottom up, and then roll out the vegetation. It's kind of instant, establishment. And you have a number of examples of green roofs. Penn Medicine right there on 202. The senior living facility that I showed earlier. There's another building on Route 30 on Lancaster Avenue. And then, of course, Hillside Elementary that the township got some grant funding for and has green roofs there that have been working excellent. So you're kind of lucky and unique that you have a lot of those local examples. But here's the smallest scale example, bringing it down to the homeowner level that I could think of. Okay, so riparian buffers. What about those of us, fortunate enough to live closer to water? In this case, this is more of a pond. There are numerous functions and benefits from this. Obviously, direct interception of stormwater runoff from, what's often a compacted landscape, aesthetic benefits, in-stream benefits, ecological benefits, could go on. And just some examples. of and these are more pond and lake examples, but and the examples that Mark showed were streams, higher energy systems with where the uh, erosion is maybe a lot more evident, but over time our lakes and ponds, they suffer from similar issues, and just establishing that border and that vegetation is is extremely beneficial. So this is the same project, a number of years. You can see this is looking at two different angles, but this is a winter photo of where the buffer was put in that is now, kind of matured. And here's where the project stopped. And you can see how the shoreline just kept going due to in this case, lack of root structure, lack of vegetation, uh, Canada goose um, population there is quite heavy. So you have some local examples here too. Wilson Farm Park, an excellent vegetated buffer and filter strip around that. The lower photo from Valley Forge, there's some vegetated filter strips there as well. And these systems are doing the same thing that those more engineered systems that we just showed are doing. They're intercepting, they're capturing, and they're treating the runoff that flows to them and through them. Um, and yes, native vegetation is the right tool for the job. I don't need to, I'm definitely preaching to the choir there. Um, the deer resistance, you can see the protection that's needed to put up to even the more deer resistant plants. I'm a believer that the term deer resistance is relative to the deer density. So um, if you haven't gone grocery shopping for a while and you don't feel like going grocery shopping, that dusty can of peas in the back of your pantry starts to become a little more. You start to consider perhaps cracking it open. And I think, I see that happen when it comes to deer. When I've had heavy pressure at my house, I've seen rhododendrons that have been, browsed slightly, um, which I hadn't seen before. So, um, I'm not, and I've also seen, I know the folks at Jenkins know this better than I do, but if you've spent time in areas that have been excluded from deer browsing, you begin to realize how big of an impact they have on our landscape. And it's not just the plant species that you see or the lack of new recruitment in terms of woody vegetation, or the weed whacker line that you see at the edge of the forest along Valley Forge National Historic Park. But it's also the hydrology of our watersheds that has changed because they're taking out uh, levels of the forest. And to that point, I'll pass it back to Mark, who is still muted.
Thank you, Clay. After years of these Zoom calls, I don't think I'll ever get that straight. Anyway, this is a photograph of Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve, and it's included in here just to follow up what Clay was talking about. This has been about 30 years of a deer fence around the preserve, so it's a good example, and I think Jenkins Arboretum is seeing that as well, that once the forest has excluded at least some level of deer pressure, you start to see layers in forest. And that's what a healthy forest should have. Healthy understory, healthy subcanopy, healthy and diverse herbaceous layer. And one of the main reasons we want to talk about this is those healthy forests actually have less runoff. We call it interception, or some people call it bioretainment, but those layers tend to trap water and hold water on the leaves and on the trunks. so there's less runoff. So we mainly talk about deer with regard to eating a lot of desirable plants like these Virginia bluebells, but it's also an impact that we tend not to talk much about is that those deer browse forest that just has that thin layer of fern, canopy, and very little shrubs except for Japanese barberry actually produce more runoff. Now, I'm going to make a little transition. And Clay talked about like green roofs, we talked about rain gardens, and we often tend to just think about that as those are green infrastructure solutions. But green infrastructure goes well beyond just small, like stormwater treatments. It also includes our natural green infrastructure. It includes areas that are degraded, like floodplains and reconnecting streams that are floodplains. So we're going to give a few examples of that, or even doing go back, Clay, just quick. Interesting solutions with stormwater management. So the photograph in the upper right, that actually is a stormwater basin. So our stormwater basins can be more creative if we want them to be. So that was a stormwater basin created by marrying stormwater design principles with restoration ecology. Native plants, I'm definitely big on it, a huge advocate of Doug Tallamy's work. And this green roof in the bottom right is from, I forget the name, the Maine Botanic Garden, and growing on the roof are all low bush blueberry. So sometimes I think we tend to follow patterns that we could be more creative. Go ahead, Clay, sorry. So what we're going to look at now are some examples of how we can reduce runoff through restoration. And there's a couple ways. One, reforestation, naturalization. But even meadows, if you walk through a meadow after a rain, you're probably going to be wet up to your waist. And that's the whole concept of rainfall interception or bioretainment. That water never gets to the ground to begin as runoff. It's stuck on the leaves. It's trapped there. It's held there. The other one is reconnecting streams that are floodplain. And that can be done either through lowering the floodplain or raising the stream channel. Raising the stream channel tends to be a little less invasive than lowering an entire floodplain, but there's been projects that did both. Floodplain enhancement, that's what I was talking about, lowering the floodplain. You're enhancing its floodplain by reconnecting it so it actually floods as frequently as it should. And hydrologic restoration. Especially in agricultural areas, there are remnant agricultural ditches that are all over. And we don't think about it, but many of those ditches, even if they start to fill in, still provide faster conduits for water to get from point A to a stream than if it just flowed naturally through a meadow or through a forest. This is an urban project where you can see the two people in the upper left standing over a stream. It was a piped stream that once it was removed, you can see, and look, this is not the greatest example because the pipe still continues for about a half mile, but it allowed to, in this case, to create urban green space as well as naturalizing the stream corridor. And this is what I was talking about just a few seconds ago, actually. One of those remnant ditches that goes through a forest. And in this case, it helped drain a wetland and help facilitate flow from an upgradient development through the forest to a receiving body. And one of the techniques is very simple. It's just plugging the ditch, just moving some earth around. Usually there's side cast material that's still evident even after many years to use to plug the ditch. And in this case, it was a project that looked at extending the hydro period of a series of vernal pools that were drying out too quickly, as well as getting rid of a ditch and looking at retaining that water for a longer period of time. One, to take that excess volume away from the downstream stream, and two, to extend the hydro period of these vernal pools so the organisms can go through their whole life cycle. And this is a project at a military base, but they wanted to convert a lawn area into a natural area. And two things here. It was restoring or stabilizing an eroded stream bank and reconnecting the stream to the floodplain. So one of the things it's a very simple restoration technique that can help reduce the volume of runoff getting to the streams is just creating more complex microtopography. And what that means is for most things we do with equipment and grading is everything's flat and everything tends to grade uniformly to a point. In restoration, what we try to do is make these areas as rough as possible. And we always have trouble with our contractors because they're just taught to grade very uniformly. And our concept usually is we want it to look like an English muffin. Lots of nooks and crannies. And those little nooks and crannies are what store water during a rain event. So that water doesn't leave the site. So it doesn't get to the stream. And that's a much more natural feature that we've somewhat lost after years of agriculture. Even many of our current forests really established after they were farmed or clear cut years ago. So if you have the chance, just creating small depressions is another very simple way to keep volume, that volume of water on your site. And one of the things, and I think it came up in a question too, is it might not be a lot of water, but if everyone stored a little bit, it'll start to make a difference on a watershed scale. So a lot of our restoration projects are designed to keep water on site as long as possible. And a lot of times it's either through grading or it's we want that water to help drive wetland hydrology and to create better connection between the stream and the stream's floodplain. Oh, Clay, go back. I'm forgetting things. The area on the right-hand side of the stream was an old technique called the brush mattress, where we essentially layer willow cuttings into essentially very flat surface. We call it a mattress because it's tied down, but it really is just like almost a weave of live cuttings of willow. And you bury them with a little bit of soil and they tend to all resprout. So in this case, it's hard to pick the willow out, but it really was just a whole stream bank covered with young willow. And it's a great way to stabilize eroded stream banks in more open areas. Sorry, Clay. And this is classic more rural eroded stream. And in this case, it's not even a very developed watershed with regard to residential housing or commercial. It's mainly an agricultural watershed, but there's still more runoff than there was historically. And part of the problem with this stream is that at one point it was straightened, like we talked about before. It was a farm site. They straightened the channel just to get water through the farm as quickly as possible. And right now the stream is finally, it's trying to lengthen itself, so it can reduce the velocity of and the excess volume associated with it in the channel. So we call it unraveling, and the stream was unraveling quickly. And this is the same stream I showed before with the photograph that it moved 23 feet in 4 years. The arrow shows the same house as was in the previous picture, but in this case, the stream was elevated. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the rock and where Clay's moving the cursor. That was what we'll call an in-stream grade control. And it's essentially large rock that were placed across the stream and probably 10 feet into each bank. And it raised the entire channel bottom to allow it to flood more frequently. So this stream it didn't flood until it was close to a 10-year storm. So now it floods somewhere between a 1.5 and a 2-year storm. Now, I just wanted to share this with you because this is just one of those natural techniques that helps in a flood-prone area. And it's called a slit trench with live posts of, in this case, sycamore. And the trench was probably 3 feet deep, was deep enough to hit the water table. And the sycamore cuttings were placed in there, and they were placed in a series. And they were used in this case, so when we knew the stream would go at a bank and it was flowing across a more open plain, these were just used to create resistance to that flow, to slow the velocity of the water down and foster sedimentation, as well as cut down on the erosive velocities of the stream. So one of the themes we have with a lot of these projects is the stabilization of them minimizes the sediment, from the eroded soil to go into the stream channel. And then the other techniques are once the floodwater is into the floodplain to create enough resistance to the flow that it fosters sedimentation in the floodplain. This is a small trout stream in Bucks County. Initially, this was looked at as being a very heavy-handed project, creating meanders and essentially moving the entire channel. And ultimately, it was decided that probably the best thing to do is a lighter touch and just stabilize some of the more eroded areas and just plant a lot of trees. And many times, the simple solution often is the best. And this was a case where Bucks County Trout Unlimited and some of the other partners in this project agreed. And so it went from a more complex project to a pretty simple project. And can you go back one, Clay? And just what we're doing here are called root wads. And we buried a trunk of a tree with a root fan sticking out into the channel. And in this case, what happens is the water comes around the bend and hits the root fan, and there's all the little roots and the root mass itself just create resistance, and it slows the flow and diverts that flow towards the center of the channel and helps stabilize the bank and reduce erosion. And this is the site, probably a year after it was planted. You can see all the trees, but a lot of the purpose of the trees, it's one, the root systems will help stabilize the bank, and two, it'll create shade over the waters of the trout stream.
Eventually, not in this picture, but soon.
Not in that picture. No, we've got some time. Just planting trees, and again, focus on native trees. They can be really important for intercepting precipitation. And many cities like New York and their million tree planting program, that's the whole purpose, how we could minimize runoff And planting trees is an easy way and a very popular way to reduce runoff. And see, one healthy large oak can intercept 27% of total precipitation in an area. And it sounds like a lot, but when you look at some of the big trees, especially more open grown trees, they have a lot of leaves and a lot of layers just within that tree. So these can be just very simple, straightforward ways to reduce the amount of runoff that goes to our streams and help improve the quality of our streams. So thank you very much. And I know we have some questions and we'd be happy to try to answer them.
Let's see.
Thank you so much, Mark and Clay. I am trying to bring myself back.
There you are.
Here I am. Wonderful. We do definitely have a lot of questions, and there's some questions sprinkled into the chat as well. So I'll work on kind of pulling those out as you guys are answering.
Oh yeah, I see one in here. Of course, the Trefferin Public Library, of course, has a green roof. That's just another one to add to the list.
Yes, that was a great
Yeah.
comment. I didn't realize that they had a green roof, so that's awesome. All right, so some of these questions, as they come in, obviously take us back towards more of the beginning of the presentation. So we'll kind of bounce back and forth. So someone was asking, how do you define the area of a headwater, the bounds?
Oh, that's a good question. There's not a specific drainage area that I would necessarily call a headwater area or not. It's all relative, right? If you were to stand in the middle of Valley Creek and start walking upstream and then make a left or a right where a tributary comes in and keep walking, eventually, if you're doing this in the summer or really any time of year, eventually you're gonna walk out of water and onto what looks like dry ground. And the further up you go, you're probably going to wind up at a pipe outfall or some kind of likely artificial um, drainage feature that concentrates stormwater runoff, unfortunately, in our landscape. So, um, it's a general term. Obviously, we have a ranking of streams, first order, second order, depending on how many other tributaries tie in. And the further upstream you go, you're less likely to have flow year round. And, you may find yourself in a wetland after you kind of walk out of the stream, like I said, going upstream. But um, so there's not really a specific threshold for that, in my opinion.
Well, I'll give you a different answer.
I can
The
always
Army
trust you
Corps
to
of
do that.
Engineers views it as 5 cubic feet per second. And their more generic approach to it, if you can jump over it, it's probably a headwater stream. But it can really vary, like Clay's saying. There is a headwater area at a spring in Bucks County. I don't know if any of you have been to the New Hope area, but it's called Aquatong Springs. And it generates about 2 million gallons of discharge a day. So right at the spring, the stream has brook trout right there. So that's the headwater of it, is really that spring. But the stream is too big to actually be considered a headwater stream by most definitions. But the spring is the important part. And I know in Chester County, there's a lot of those areas, especially in limestone areas with springs on hillsides. And those really are the important headwater areas.
Yeah.
So here's our next question. How do we average homeowners learn the details of our neighborhood's drainage network when we mostly just know whether we have a dry basement?
Well, you've got the facts straight, the most important ones, hoping that you have a dry basement. Not everyone is that fortunate, but thankfully, most of us are. I mean, the best way, I, you know, I would suggest, depending on where you are, your community may or may not. They likely have storm sewer mapping that the township, whether it's Tredyffrin or others, maintain, which you could likely get. That might be an odd request, but you could also, I mean, what I would do, what I would suggest you do is just play the role of a raindrop, right? Look at your downspout, um, and walk downstream. Think about the way that water flows. If you don't mind getting your feet wet, do it when it's raining, and you'll see it go into an inlet, and that inlet probably goes in a general, the pipe that leaves the inlet probably goes downhill, not always. Sometimes pipes can go kind of the other way, but you'll probably see another inlet. And if you walk to that one, you'll probably see another one. And pretty soon you'll probably find yourself in a stream and know how your property is directly connected to the stream. So I would go out and observe it, and I wouldn't pull any manholes or get in any infrastructure, but from the surface, just on a casual walk, you'd be surprised at what you can figure out.
This question is, I heard my neighbors had to go through multiple permittings to work on their stream. How much streamside improvements can we do as homeowners on streams without township, state, or federal permits?
Mark, I'm going to punt on that one.
Yeah, I figured that. That's actually a very good question. If you plan on doing something that modifies the stream bank, you would need a permit. But to make it confusing, you're allowed to do normal property maintenance. So if you're planting a tree or planting vegetation, or if you were able to plant shrubs or native plants on your stream bank, you're allowed to do that. It's once you modify the bank or the channel is when you would need a permit.
Okay. There was another permit question I'm just scrolling up to. This one was specifically, do root wads require permits? I believe that was in your slide, Mark.
To put them in the stream channel? Yes.
I'm assuming that's what they're asking.
That's considered stream bank restoration, and there's very specific nationwide permits for that. And Pennsylvania has restoration waivers for certain activities to help encourage those kind of projects. But like the first question, none of it's easy.
All right. This question is for a property on a hillside. Is there any advice on how to manage the balance between allowing downspouts to drain naturally into the permeable ground and the erosion it creates? In the past, I allowed my downspouts to drain into the permeable ground around my driveway. This caused erosion issues, so I ended up rerouting the downspouts back into my driveway.
Yeah, there certainly is a balance, and you probably, from the sounds of things, have a pretty steep property, because generally downspout disconnection can be done without those consequences. Um, and I don't, there's a lot of other questions, was the area that the downspout was diverted to, what kind of vegetation was there? Was that vegetation established before it was diverted? And there's some other comments in here about soil health and other things that can greatly influence how erodible soil is or is not. But the question is perfectly valid. At some point, if your property is that steep, and I know there's a lot of steep areas around this part of Chester County. that you could have trouble getting stable subgrades. So that's a very site specific um, question. But I will say that I have not seen that very often. Oftentimes that'll pop up after when it's very new development and even if it's just lawn, which obviously from a water quality standpoint isn't the best thing, but we all have some portion of lawn for sure. Um, it can be hard to get that initial establishment, and so sometimes what we'll recommend is that you wait until those areas are really fully established, maybe even a growing season before you have that concentrated, semi-concentrated downspout discharging. But it's a good question.
Are bioswales an efficient method carrying runoff through a property?
Yeah, absolutely. We a bioswale just meaning like any kind of shallow channel that's filled with native vegetation that gives you a chance to slow the runoff down, and let the plants use it. It's similar to one of the examples that we showed on a homeowner level where you're um, forcing that runoff in a way to be in contact with soil and native vegetation. And anytime you do that, that's going to be beneficial. So a bioswale is infinitely better than a pipe and a lot better than just a turf grass vegetated swale.
This question is asking if you could talk a little bit more about what legacy sediment is.
And Mark, I wanted to add to that, and I'll just mention one thing. A lot of the legacy sediment that you'll hear about, and this was really first, I think, kind of that term was, I think, maybe even coined in Pennsylvania from research in Pennsylvania, because if you look at the historical maps, it was mill dam right down the row. The tailwater of one mill dam was flowing into the pond of the next one. And so you had this artificial system, this stair step artificial system, and you had in some cases, tens of feet of sediment um, build up. And then when the mill dams eventually fail or were no longer maintained, now you have a floodplain, a native floodplain where you can, I think in the people who kind of coined that term, you could find artifacts, prehistoric artifacts covered with 10 feet of sediment post mill dam creation. So your whole floodplain ended up filled with sediment artificially, and now you lose the benefit of having a floodplain itself. You have no storage, you have no attenuation, and you have plant species that no longer can reach the water table that's now artificially, you know, 6 or 8 feet beneath them. So that's when the term legacy sediment, like you showed in that diagram, that's in many cases the original source for it.
This person admits that they're not from our area and has a question about beavers. I thought I'd throw this one out there. It says, are beavers allowed to dam streams or rivers in your urban areas, or are they considered a nuisance? I haven't thought much about.
I like this question, but Mark, you want to say something about it? I had a good site visit yesterday to this point.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, and it really wasn't that long ago where beaver were not very common. So it was kind of exciting to know if there was a beaver pond and a beaver dam on a stream. And their populations have expanded enough that the nuisance term is becoming more and more prevalent. And they are difficult to deal with. But in more rural areas where they're not as much of a nuisance, they provide a really important role in habitat for a lot of species because it really is temporary habitat. And, in many places, they're really important for waterfowl, migration. So they do play a very important role. It's when they're in kind of our suburban landscape that they do tend to be a nuisance, with localized flooding. And in some cases, and I know one township we're working with, that they're backing water up enough into the culvert of a road that now when there's a rain event, the pipe is full of water already because of the beaver, so it's flooding the road and creating some safety issues. So yeah, they can be a nuisance.
Yeah, and what are they allowed to? Yes, the beaver can do as a beaver does, but yeah, in some cases it does create a problem. And there are devices that can allow the beaver to build a dam and still not impound water. You'll see those put in from time to time, but yeah, it's a good we've done some dam removal projects with the expectation that after we remove the dam, restore the floodplain, that beaver will show up and not recreate the dam, but expand the floodplain beyond what we left it post-construction after we ripped the dam out. So we'll take the dam out, remove sediment, with the full expectation that beaver will repopulate the site and keep that floodplain even wetter than it would otherwise be, and get that water even further out of the channel in places where it doesn't create, new impacts. But that is something, and in some of our projects, Mark mentioned about the ditch plugging and things like that. We'll sometimes sort of engineer beaver dams. Use that beaver dam as an analog and create a natural system that functions the way that they would, because as he said, they do play in some places an important ecological role.
Hey, Clay, while we're talking about beaver, and Amy, there's a new question. Talks about beaver taking down riparian buffer shrubs and trees.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, and they never get permits. That's been our experience. But yeah, they I don't know, Mark, if you want to handle the comment about vegetation, if you're planting, putting money into vegetation, trying to get tree cover, and there's the real expectation that that there are beaver populations in the area. It's expensive food, but hard to keep away from them.
Yeah, but what's interesting, Clay, is we're talking about methods to slow flow, to reduce erosion, and the beavers do exactly the same thing.
Mhm.
By creating those little dams, they pond water, which then, if a stream flows into it, it slows the water. It fosters sedimentation. So in some ways, they're doing what we're talking about. The issue is they do it in a way that's sometimes a nuisance. So being nature's little engineers, they often get us to the same point in stabilizing channels and slowing water and fostering sedimentation in their own way.
Yep.
all right. I'm going to try to go back to the beginning for a couple of these. When you were talking about the dry well, someone commented, it seems to me that the 30-gallon dry well only keeps 30 gallons from overflowing to the driveway. Is it worth it?
Good question. And the example photo that I use, just to give you some idea of scale, um, although that was still something that the gentleman there, the landowner, was could pick up and hold. That was probably that system, but with the stone, the additional stone he put around, that was probably a 200 or 300 gallon system. So a 30-gallon system would really be small, much smaller than that example in the picture. And it's all relative. It's all relative to the drainage area. Is it a large roof, or is it a small patio that you're capturing? And of course, the end of that question is it worth it? That's a question we ask ourselves every day. Certainly 30 gallons is better than none. And what we often forget is that most of the time when it rains, it doesn't rain a whole lot. Now, I know in the township and beyond, especially since 2018, we have had some serious storms that have people reconsidering what a 100-year storm is, and we have seen some really intense rainfall, and a dry well isn't gonna save us from that. But most of the time when it rains, it's a quarter inch, a third of an inch, a half an inch, a typical rainy day. A relatively small system on a moderately sized drainage area, maybe bigger than 30 gallons, can do a lot. And the flooding problem that we have in the Mid-Atlantic and beyond is not one single thing caused that, right? It's a million paper cuts, and not one thing is going to fix it. It's going to be a lot of small scale things that add up. So, yeah, fair question as well, but those little things add up.
We're going to run out of time at some point here soon. So I'm going to try to kind of maybe group a couple things in like a little bit of a bigger umbrella. So I'm seeing a few people who are asking, you know, I guess this person starts off very nicely. It's like, for me, how do I begin? Where can I get help? So some of the questions are alluding to, having trouble or issues or things by stream sides. Maybe you guys can talk a little bit about good resources for folks, or if they do have questions and need support as property owners, like maybe where you would suggest that they start asking questions.
Yeah, Mark, do you wanna take a stab at that and I can fill in?
If if the question more about stream channel, like stream bank and riparian areas, yeah, there's a lot of general information on that. It's a great place to start. And if I remember right, even Pennsylvania's Best Management Practice Manual has a section on riparian plants. It identifies the plants. Even some of the nursery catalogs, I know for sure, like Pinelands Nursery, their catalog identifies which plants that they grow would be good in riparian areas. And I remember it being pretty accurate, and they're all native species.
Oh yeah. And there's another nursery, Octorara, or
Yeah,
yeah, a
I
lot
was
of
trying
good
to think
resources
that way.
up there. Yeah.
And even speaking with the salespeople at the nurseries, they're very helpful in helping homeowners. But I'm sure there's even native plant sales. And Amy, I don't know, does Jenkins Arboretum have one?
Yes, we sell plants through our garden shop, basically the end of April through the end of October. So we have plants throughout most of the year for sale. Yep.
I'm guessing that you probably have people that could point out which ones of those probably do well in riparian areas.
Potentially. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then there are a lot of other questions that kind of allude to challenges within the township, places with heavy runoff, within township systems. How could township residents kind of take action or ask questions at the township level? Is that something that you guys could speak to?
Well, obviously you have a very active EAC, and they're probably I know a few of them I see are on here, um, are kind of a clearinghouse, or connect the dots with folks at the township, whether it's identifying problem areas, being an extra set of eyes and ears to for on the ground, to make sure that people aren't doing what they're not supposed to do as it relates to streams and riparian vegetation. So, yeah, I would say that that's a really good starting point.
Great. And I will include the Tredyffrin Township Environmental Advisory Council's their webpage, links to different things like that in the resources that I'll send out after the lecture. So if you're not able to find them yourself, I will have those links available for those of you after the lecture. Okay, great.
Great.
Well, I do apologize that we didn't get to every single question. There were a lot of great things that came in, I think that speaks to the necessity for this lecture and the topic. And so again, I want to thank Clay and Mark for being here with us tonight and sharing their expertise. And I hope that the continuation of this conversation can continue with programs that Jenkins does and Tredyffrin Township and the library. Hopefully we can continue to bring you programs on this topic because again, it seems like something that we all need to keep discussing and has good relevance in the township that we live in. So again, Clay and Mark, thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone who's still with us for joining us tonight. And hopefully we'll see you. Jenkins does free virtual lectures every third Thursday of the month. And so hopefully we will see you in some of our future lectures. All right. Good night, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye now.